Fellowship of Reconciliation was formed by a German and a French pastors after the end of World War I. At the end of World War I, the devastation of the quote Great War was so great that these two pastors from the opposing countries decided that they needed to do something to found an organization that would say something and do something for peace. They founded the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and that group is one of the oldest, I would consider it the premier peace organization in the world. There are others that have come on since then, but FOR is a fantastic group. Back in about 2001, they started a project of sending delegations to Israel and Palestine. They started this project around 2006 or 2007, I'm not sure the exact date. This project went off on its own, the Interfaith Peace Builders. This is ecumenical, it's interfaith, it's people trying to go to Israel and Palestine, to be with the people on both sides, to listen to voices on both sides, and to come back here and try to affect public dialogue, the public political dialogue in this country, to say that this conflict, there are ways to get out of this conflict. The delegation I went on in November of 2010 was the 35th such delegation. They send 3 delegations per year. This one is called the Olive Harvest Delegation because every year in October and November, the Palestinians want to do their olive harvest. And sometimes they need help, not just in terms of help in terms of harvesting the olives, but also in terms of defending them from violence from Israeli settlers. So I start these pictures with an olive tree. This olive tree is about 400 or 500 years old. If I had better lighting on it, you could see how big the trunk is, which is an indication of how old the trunk is. It originally was from a Palestinian village. This is our delegation. There were 26 of us, 25 of us from the United States and 1 from Canada. We had 2 co-leaders, Scott Kennedy and Elise Cohen. And these people were fantastic because they've had a whole lot of experience. Scott Kennedy has been involved with peace and justice organizations since the Vietnam War, just as I have. He's about my age, maybe a little bit older. Elise Cohen is a Jewish person. She's about 40, I would say. Her sister came on this delegation. Out of this group, 8 people were Jewish. Most of us were Christian. Previous delegations had Muslims in it, but as it worked out, this particular delegation didn't have any Muslims in it. We wished we had, but oh well, that's the way it goes. I think it was because Ramadan was at that point. For Jewish people, this is a roller coaster ride. Because for Jews who have grown up with Zionist education, they've come and they find out that things that they didn't know were going on. This is a good group of people. Most of us were in our 40s and 50s and 60s. There were about 4 younger people in their 20s. When you come in, you land in Tel Aviv airport and you come in and you see the wall, you see the villages, you see Palestinian villages on one side and you see Israeli settlements on the other. And watch that because the language is right there. The language is, Arabs live in villages, settlers live in settlements. You know, there's this war of words going on. You have to be very careful which words you use, and sometimes the words we use don't mean what we think they mean. Jerusalem was originally part of the state of Israel. After the 67 war, Israel annexed East Jerusalem and started the occupation of all of the West Bank and all of the Gaza Strip. Here's Israel. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. You've got Lebanon and Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Jerusalem is right here in the center. See, when the Jewish settlers originally came before, during, and after World War II, they settled on the plains by the Mediterranean Sea. This area is very fertile. The West Bank, it refers to the West Bank of the Jordan River, which runs from the Sea of Galilee here to the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is right on the border. East Jerusalem, which includes the Holy City, the walled city, was on the other side of the line. It was administered by Jordan between 1948 and 1967. After the 67 war, the Israelis took over the West Bank, the Golan Heights in Syria, and the Gaza Strip. This is a lot of people. And that was 43 years ago. Under international law, occupations are supposed to be a temporary thing. It's gone on 43 years. How did this keep going? Well, there's developed a matrix of control, because in order to have this kind of occupation, what has developed over time is a way of controlling the population of the West Bank. And this includes more and more Israeli settlements, because there is obviously more and more Jewish people coming from all over the world to live in Israel. In fact, after the Iron Curtain fell, a whole lot of people were coming from behind the Iron Curtain. So they have tremendous pressure to settle people. The question is, how are they doing this? What they're doing is they're settling people in the West Bank. They're settling people in occupied territories, which is against international law. To control this, after the First Intifada and Second Intifada, and these are uprisings. The First Intifada, the uprising of people, primarily nonviolent in the first instance, was to non-cooperation with the occupation. And then the Second Intifada. After the Second Intifada, they started building a wall. A wall which cost about $2 billion. I've heard one figure say that it was $3 billion. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that, according to Jeff Halper, it was about $2 billion. It's still a lot of money. What you're seeing in this picture is the wall. On the left is the Shuafat refugee camp. These are people who were displaced. These are Palestinians who were displaced during the 1948 Nakba. This is the Palestinian word, the Arabic word for catastrophe. This is where so many people were driven out of their homes, a lot of people killed, so many made refugees, many villages being razed to the ground. In order to claim the right of return to their homes, well, they went into refugee camps and then refused to leave those refugee camps all over various places in Israel and in the West Bank and elsewhere. Although if they left those refugee camps, they wouldn't be able to claim that right of return. What you're seeing here on the left is the refugee camp. If you see on the right hand of this picture, you see some olive trees. Those olive trees belong to the town of Anata, which we're standing in at this point. The wall cuts off the olive groves from about 100 of these villages. I just turned to the right. I was standing in the same spot. You see the same wall. You see the same olive trees. This is an Israeli settlement village called Pisgat Ze'evan. The wall separates these two. The way you can tell them differently is because the Palestinian homes have cisterns on the top. When it rains, they save the water. And they have water systems that come in, but they're not reliable. In the settler villages, the Israeli settler village, they don't need water tanks on. The water system is reliable. And this is true wherever we go. This is one of the first things you see as you're coming in from the airport. The man with the gray cap, the black t-shirt is Jeff Haper. And I find him to be incredibly helpful in his political analysis. Jeff Haper has been involved with the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions. This book, Obstacles to Peace, is a book that I highly recommend. He was the one that gave us our political overview. And this book that his talk was based on that. And he's the one that showed us around and gave us and told us about this matrix of control. This is olive trees. These are the stumps of olive trees that have been cut down for security reasons. We're still east of Jerusalem here in the greater East Jerusalem. But these olive trees have been cut down. But the olive trees are livelihood for Palestinians for centuries. It's a great tragedy that these have been cut down. The settlements are not a side issue. The settlements are the prime issue. Actually, there's two prime issues. One is the refugees, the other is the settlements. The first is all the Palestinians who have driven out of their homes and driven out of their homes since then. The other part, the flip side of that issue is the settlements, and it is to the tune of about 200,000. I've heard other figures up to 500,000. I would believe that figure, but I'll stick with the 200,000 that's in Jeff Halper's book. 200,000 Israeli settlers settling in various huge settlement blocks. This is a mammoth undertaking by the Israeli government. It is not a side. This is not being done by a fringe group. This is the policy of the Israeli government to build, to coordinate, and to subsidize these settlements. These settlements all run along the north of Jerusalem, all the way from Israel proper to Jericho. Arguably the oldest city in the world. It sits just a few kilometers away from the Jordan River. If all of these settlements are finished all through here, this effectively divides the West Bank into two sections, the north and the south, and there are other divisions happening also. To make a Palestinian state, when you have two non-contiguous parts, there's more than that. There's the northern part of the West Bank, the southern part, the Gaza Strip, and there's so many incursions by these settlements that it is becoming a Bandustan settlement. It is becoming an apartheid state. There's another group of settlements just south Jerusalem. All of this will cut off the Jerusalem area for Palestinians to the Hebron area, which is also one of the holy cities. This is a matter of carving up the West Bank into ways that it's almost impossible, becoming more and more impossible to think of it as being an independent state. What you're seeing here in this picture is desert land between Jerusalem and the Jordan River. Remember I said the coastland is lots of water, it's very fertile. There's still some fertility here, but it's basically a desert. There's very little water. Part of this matrix of control that I was talking about is the settler roads. Think of the settler roads of going from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or any of the other primarily Israeli cities going to the settlements, and they have what we would consider interstates. It's like all the people who have yellow license plates can drive on the interstate. Anybody who has a white or a green license plate has to stay on the unimproved roads, and you can see several of them. Meaning, anybody who has an Israeli license plate can use these settler roads. Anybody who is caught on these roads with the wrong license plates will be stopped by armed guards, by armed soldiers with their rifles. I've seen it done. As I said, this is desert area, and right there, they're building a fountain. Ma'al al-Dumin is going to be a huge city, and in the desert area, I think you would call it conspicuous consumption of water. So part of the reason for these settlements is control of water aquifers. This is the wall in Abu Dis. Abu Dis is one of the villages that was incorporated into East Jerusalem. This wall cuts right through the village. The explanation given for the wall is for security. It's also being used to cut off Palestinian villages from their lands. In this case, in Abu Dis, it's being used for purely demographic reasons. It cuts right through the town because on one side of the town there will be they're hoping there will be a 70% Jewish population rate as opposed to Palestinian. And on the other side, they will care less. This wall is going to be, when it's done, will be about 450 miles long, cutting in and out of the West Bank, taking the aquifers, incorporating the settlements into the urban areas of Israel. We took a trip down to the southern part. Gaza is right down on the Mediterranean Sea, a narrow strip of land. I think it's something like 5 miles wide and 20 miles long. There's about 1.5 million people in it. UN officials have called it the biggest open-air prison in the world. And we all know what happened in Gaza in December of 2008, January of 2009. The ceasefire that had been brokered earlier in 2008 was broken the day of Barack Obama's election, and then right around Christmas time, bombing of Gaza started. There were about 1,400, at least, people killed, hundreds and hundreds of homes demolished. The use of various weapons that are outlawed, such as white phosphorus, used by the Israeli army in the attack. Eric Yellin, of Other Voices, lives in this town of Sderot. Sderot is a Israeli settler town for working people just outside of Gaza. For years, these people have been friends with their neighbors in Gaza. After things got more and more tense, the border with Gaza was closed, he decided that he couldn't live with this anymore. You know, the rockets would be coming out of Gaza by anybody who's desperate enough to try to send one out, or some of them may have been by Hamas, but at this point Hamas was trying to stop it. He wanted to be friends with those people his friends on the other side of this border. So he made internet connections, he made telephone connections. He and Noma Macca, and I'll show her to you in a minute, founded this group called Other Voices, and they're sort of like a grassroots peace movement in Sderot. Incredible people. Eric took us on a tour of Sderot. We're in a playground here in this Israeli town. You can see the playground equipment. This piece of playground equipment is a bomb shelter. When a Qassam rocket comes out of Gaza, people have about 30 seconds, a minute, to find shelter. These rockets are not that strong. They're strong enough to kill. They're strong enough to cause damage. About 18 people have been killed over the years in Sderot and other border villages. And the kids are going to be out in the playground. They have on the loudspeakers, they're given about a minute to find shelter. They run into the bomb shelter in the playground. Every home has to have a safe room, which is reinforced. All the bus stops are reinforced. I got other pictures of that. I didn't show them here. And then after a minute or two, the kids come out. The all clear is given. These people have been living with stress for all these years. They've been living with some of them being killed and injured by Qassam rockets. I don't want to deny that. If I come across as being critical of the Israeli government, I want to point out that Israelis are suffering this stress syndrome, traumatic stress syndrome, and I'm not calling it post-traumatic stress. There's nothing post about it. Traumatic stress syndrome, just as the Palestinians are. Eric took us on to the Gaza overlook, about 2 kilometers outside of Sderot. You're looking into Gaza here. You see the first road, the first dirt road. You see the second dirt road. The third dirt road is the Gaza border. It's a no man's land. And you're seeing on the left Gaza City, you're seeing one of the refugee camps over on the right. As I mentioned, this is a very crowded city that has been suffering tremendously. We didn't try to get into Gaza. We wish we could, but that's an entirely different type of and dynamic of going to a delegation at this point. I decided for myself that I didn't want to try that at this point, although I have friends who have and will, and maybe someday I might, but right at this point we did not try to get into Gaza. The Gazans are taking the brunt of this. We go back to Sderot now. Noma Macca is an intellectual. As you can see, all the books and paintings. She's a very strong and forthright and articulate woman. She'd lived through all these years since 2000 with all these Qassam rockets falling on Sderot, on her Israeli town. Her family are Zionists, as her name indicates. They're one of the Israeli settlers. She was disgusted with the way the Israeli government responded to the Qassam rockets, responded by attacking Gaza. She saw her neighbors going out to those same hills I was showing you in the previous picture, and going out there, taking their lawn chairs and cheering the Israeli rockets going into Gaza, killing people. It was absolutely disgusting to her. She wrote a letter to, I'm not sure who she sent it to originally, Haaretz or the Jerusalem Post or whoever. She wrote an incredibly eloquent letter saying, this attack on Gaza is not in my name and not in my security. The only time that the Israeli government was looking out for me was when they observed the ceasefire. Why are you not trying to negotiate and listen to the people from Gaza as they were attacking? She was unstinting in her criticism. This woman was amazing. This woman's got a backbone of steel. I wish I could bring her here now. Very lovable woman. She said she had to struggle with certain identifications. She identified with the Israeli soldiers going over there, attacking Gaza. She also identified with the people around her, but she also identified with the Gazans, with her neighbors, with the Palestinians. That's a tricky thing to do, to hold different peoples, in fact, peoples in conflict in your heart. And she's been doing it, and she's been living there. She has refused to leave. And she and Eric Yellin have co-founded Other Voices, and they have brought people back and forth visiting to continue people the interaction. What's going on is a lot of home demolitions in the West. In the West Bank, and specifically in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is gradually the Israeli government in East Jerusalem is gradually trying to make more of the population Jewish and more of the Palestinians to leave. In certain instances in Sheikh Jarrah, this neighborhood, they want to use it as a religious theme park. The tomb of Jude the Zealot, I think it was. And they're expelling people. Nobi Hanun, I can never remember his first name. Nobi Hanun's family was kicked out by Israeli settlers out of his home in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, by Israeli commandos in the middle of the night. This is his family, the three one on the left, the young girl, her mother, and Noe's grandmother. The two women on the right are part of our delegation. He told about how the Israeli commandos with masks over their faces came in the middle of the night, kicked them out of their homes, didn't give the women time to cover their heads, which in Palestinian Muslim society is a grave, grave insult. Forced them to stay out in the street because they had the street blocked off for the next 24 hours. They couldn't leave. And then the settlers came in, the Jewish settlers came in with their yarmulkes on and went into their home and started lying on their beds, eating the foods out of their refrigerators, playing with the toys that their children had. And they had to watch it all. This is Nobi's Hanon showing us pictures of that very incident. This is the commandos with their face mask. This person is, I can't tell if it's a boy or girl, being pulled out of the house. The settlers coming in and all their belongings out on the street. This isn't even the worst of it. You know, sometimes a lot of these homes have been demolished. In this case, it wasn't a matter of demolishing the home. It was a matter of taking over the building in order to make a small settlement, a settlement of one building. One of the first things that we noticed when we went into the old city, the holy city of Jerusalem, inside the wall, what we found was there are over 70 small settlements where Israeli settlers will come in and take over one or two buildings in order to plant the Israeli flag, literally, in those particular spots. They bring their children in. The children have to go to school and back under armed guard. This has been happening in the holy city of Jerusalem. It's happening in the old city of Nablus. It's the flashpoint, and we'll get to this a little later, is in Hebron. We went up to Jenin. Jenin is one of those cities that's right up, that was involved in the second Intifada, the second uprising after 2000. It's in the northern part. It took the brunt of the Israeli army's take-back of these cities. In fact, one of the worst atrocities of all these years happened in Jenin when the refugee camp in Jenin was bulldozed. All of the houses bulldozed over a space of 3 days with bulldozers, and they wouldn't stop. People in them, they were given no warning. A number of people died in their homes because they didn't have a chance to get out. Anyway, the economy of Palestine, to a large extent, has been for centuries agricultural. The olive groves are central to this. There are people trying to make a resurgence of this. There are a good number of people harvesting their olives in their towns. But a lot of that has been taken by the wall. Not so much in Canaan, near Jenin, but in many other places. This is Canaan Olive Press we visited outside of Jenin. This is fair trade. We can get fair trade olive oil here through the First Presbyterian Church here in Binghamton. And we went to visit this to see the process. As you can see, all of these olives here. Could see the olives going in one end and coming out the other end as olive oil. It was a fun trip. I almost felt like we should get some donuts. Actually, we did have a feast afterwards. We had a picnic out in back of the olive press building among the hay bales with chicken and songs, and it was a very fun evening. And then we visited families in various towns around Jenin. Joe McGuire, the fellow on the left, the one from Toronto, and I guess you can tell which one is me. visited Mahmoud Issa's family in Anin. Mahmoud drove the taxi. He put us up in his home, and then he took us to his family's olive grove. A third of his family's olive grove had been taken by the wall, but we went and helped them with the harvesting the olives on those trees that they have access to. I took a picture from the roof of his house. This is Galilee. Northern Samaria is a little bit further south. This is what in ancient times was Galilee. You can see the wall going through the center of the picture. In this place, it's not the 26-foot high concrete structure that it is in more urban areas, but it's still a formidable barrier. Here we are setting up for the olive harvest. I had Joe take this picture of me. What you do with them, you put down the tarps on the ground, and then you grab the branch and you pull the olives off the branches with this plastic hand fork. You pull them off and they fall to the ground. I guess there's some debate about whether that's best for the olives. Actually, if you pick them by hand, there's a little less likelihood of spoilage, but they're out for a little more volume here. so we did it the quicker way, and actually not that many of them spoil when we do it this way. We spent about 4.5 hours doing this. It was a fun morning. Nablus. Nablus is also a West Bank city, founded about 2,000 years ago, actually by the Greeks. Neapolis was the original name, which became Nablus. Wajdi Yaish is a young man. He's an emergency medical technician. He survived both the first Intifada and the second Intifada. He and this other woman that we met, and I'm forgetting her name right at the moment, Oma, and I can't remember the last name right this second, founded this program in Nablus to help children deal with the stress of their lives in a war zone. And as Oma said, it's because my childhood was robbed. I want the younger kids to at least have a chance of having a childhood, to have a chance of having a life. These people are doing the real kinds of nonviolent, hands-on work with people who are suffering. Programs for the kids where they interact with each other. Oma has never left Nablus. She's never been outside of it. She's never gone anywhere. I mean, you can't. That's the other part of the matrix of control. All of the West Bank is divided up into sections, and no Palestinian can move to one section to the other without an Israeli government permit or Israeli military permit. Everything is controlled. Wajdi talks about being a 6-year-old. During the first Intifada, his mother was standing in the window of the third floor of their apartment building, and she saw some kids throwing stones at the Israeli soldiers trying to put down the uprising. He said, "Stop throwing the stones, they'll come and get you." These soldiers got mad at her, stormed into the apartment building, came up to the third floor, and beat her in front of her family. Wajdi was 6 years old at the time and hid under the couch. During the second Intifada, he was a college student. He had come home to take a break to do some of his homework. I think his actual classes are probably in Nablus itself. And he was taking a break right up here, exactly where he's standing here on the roof, smoking a cigarette, when he saw the Israeli soldiers coming in. There's hills all the way around. As you turn around, you see hill there, hill there, hill there. You can see when the soldiers start coming down. They shot at him on the roof. He was just standing there taking a break, having a cigarette. The shot went through one leg, out that leg, through another leg, out the other leg. He managed to crawl downstairs, managed to crawl down the street, down to the street level, with the help of, I guess, with his mother. The Israeli soldiers would not let an ambulance into the neighborhood. After a couple hours, they finally did allow an ambulance into the neighborhood, but then when it started to go to a hospital, they were stopped at a checkpoint again. It took them 6 hours to get to a hospital for treatment. Granted, it was not a life-threatening injury, but it was certainly extremely painful and entirely uncalled for. He wasn't shooting at anybody. When some of our delegation asked him about his working for healing people, he said, "How do you feel about it?" He says, "I can deal with my own pain. But when I'm an EMT, when I'm helping to save somebody in the ambulance that I work in, and have a 10-year-old kid die in my arms, then I'd start to wonder about my response, whether or not my anger should take over." As it is, his anger has not taken over him. He's being extremely helpful to the people around him. This is the outside of that apartment building. The upper right-hand window is his bedroom. As you can see, there are bullet holes around it. Just compare this to the bomb shelter in the Stroh playground. Yes, Jewish people and settlers in various towns are suffering. These people have no place to go. They're being shot at in their homes. The Israeli army keeps making incursions into the area over and over again. We asked him how many. He says, "I've lost count. There was one last week," he said. One of the best parts of this story is that there are Palestinian towns along the border of the West Bank, west of Ramallah. Ramallah is just north of Jerusalem, and then all these towns here. They are doing nonviolent resistance against the wall. Unarmed struggle, they call it. They have been encouraged and taught by various people who advocate Gandhian nonviolence. They do it. They march every week. The town of Yellin, they go every Friday right up to the wall, right up to where the wall is being built in their town, where some of their olive trees have been taken, most of them actually, and continually try to engage the soldiers. Classic, true nonviolence in saying, "We are people. We insist on being treated as people. You're 18, 20 years old. You should be home taking care of your families. Why are you here?" Trying to make real human communication across the gap of Israeli-Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, everything that divides them. What Iyad Burnett is showing here is a rubber bullet from the ground there. He took us up to the area where the demonstrations take place. And as you can see, underneath all this barbed wire are the remains of tear gas canisters, rubber bullets, smoke grenades. They're just littered there. December 31st, they had another one of these marches. The Israelis on the other side of the secondary fence that you can see way on the other side there, lobbed huge amounts of tear gas, much more than usual. It was volleys and volleys of it. They also used water cannon with water that had chemicals in it. The Palestinians claimed that it had wastewater in it. I don't know. But all of the tear gas chokes people, and one woman, Abu Rama, was overcome by the tear gas and died the next day, New Year's Day, just a couple of weeks ago. They went back the next Friday to do it again on the 7th. And they probably went there today, the 14th. And there's more and more of this tear gas being thrown at them. People overcome, but they continue to do it. I think we need to support these people. I think this is one of the bright spots of this whole trip. On the way back in from Berlin, heading back to Jerusalem, we had gone through one of the checkpoints, and we went through Kalendia checkpoint just to see what it was like. There are over 500 checkpoints, some of them very permanent, some of them very temporary, and all gradations in between. This checkpoint is like a cattle wade. You go in, you go through these revolving gates, about 6 of them, 7 actually, I lost count. You finally get to the end. You show your identity card, your citizenship card, whether it be from East Jerusalem, the West Bank, from wherever. We showed our passports. We happened to go there, at 5 o'clock when it wasn't hot and there weren't great crowds, but it was still an oppressive situation. When you're trying to get to work, it's a hot day and there's a whole lot of people. You're trying to get to work, or you're trying to get to the hospital, or you're trying to get to the school. This is an incredibly stressful thing, and this happens all the time. Over 500 checkpoints throughout the area is just an incredible burden for all Palestinians to have to live with. And there's no wonder Palestinians get angry and determined. Elise Cohen, one of our co-leaders, as I mentioned earlier, she's Jewish. She talks about the Ashkenazi Jewish people suppressing the Mizrahi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are the ones who primarily settled in the Rhine Valley in Germany. They took the brunt of the Shoah, the Holocaust. The Mizrahi Jews are, quote, Arab Jews. They had lived all through the Middle East with Muslims and Christians in peace for centuries. Many of them had to be kicked out. This is in Tel Aviv. The neighborhood of Mizrahi Jews is being gentrified. This town is being, this house is being torn down for gentrification. It's a hard row to hoe if you are not the group that's in power. A new profile is the peace group, is one of the premier peace groups. They advocate people not going into the army. They support the Shminitzim, the high school students who refuse to join the army. They support anyone who wants to be a conscientious objector. They also tell people who do not want to be oppressors of their neighbor Palestinians, use any means you can. I had to laugh because I remember how I got the same advice from American Friends Service Committee back in 1970 when I was becoming a conscientious objector. I think it's very true. Whatever is applicable, but they very much are opposed to and want to support anybody who refuses to follow orders, refuses to enlist, or refuses to re-enlist, or refuses to take part in the occupation. Ofer Lith is the one who was talking about advising the young people. You have to remember all Israeli citizens, when they become 18, male and female, are drafted into the army. And if they refuse to go, they get thrown in jail for a certain amount of time. They're let go and immediately called up again. And if they refuse, they're sent back to jail again. Hebron is one of the holy cities for all faiths. It's the place where the tombs of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their wives. Since 1929, it has been exclusively a Palestinian, a Muslim city, because there was a great deal of misunderstanding in 1929 during the beginnings of the Zionist settlements. Rumors went around that the Zionists were trying to take over the Wailing Wall. It wasn't true, but then there was a massacre of Jews in Hebron. So from 1929 through 1967, there were no Jews in Hebron. which is a tragedy, but it also has led to an incredibly tense situation where Jewish settlers have been very aggressively coming back in and taking over part of the city, sterilizing the area, the streets going to where they live. And I use that term purposely. That is the word that they use. They say they sterilize the streets of Palestinians when they want to come in to the town, into the city, and out. They don't need these settlements inside the city. They have a settlement block outside of Hebron. But there have been home demolitions. There's been a whole lot of tension here. David Wilder here is a spokesman for the Israeli settlers. We listened to him. We wanted to hear what he had to say. He talked about the Muslim conspiracy to take over the world. He talked about how they're all jihadists. He said that there are certain imams in the world who want to take over the United States and make it another caliphate, and all you Americans should beware that the Sharia law will be imposed upon you. I want to just be able to walk around the streets in peace, but meanwhile he carries a Glock, a loaded Glock, a pistol in the back of his belt, in the small of his back. It was pure paranoia and pure resentment. And I'm sorry, I try not to judge people, but I found it very hard to listen to this person, and we all did. But he is indicative of a certain segment of Israeli settlers, the ones who are ideologically and religiously committed in a way that I fail to comprehend. This is not to say that they are representative of Jewish people as a whole, but they certainly have a strong hold on the policies of the government at this point, of the Israeli government at this point. I mentioned that and this kind of paranoia and this kind of attitude towards people, their neighbors, because this is an indication of what that is. Just about another mile inside the town, inside the city of Hebron, we're walking in a Palestinian street. This is one of those bazaar streets with lots of shops up and down. And what you see above you is all these wire cages. The wire netting was put there for a purpose, because up above is one of those small Israeli settlements that I was talking about, where a couple of buildings have been taken over by settlers. And the settlers throw their garbage out their back windows. Bricks, trash, sewage. And these screens have to be put up, and as you can see, they still throw the garbage because there's more stuff on there. And that's just a couple of feet later, you can see the flag. This is where it gets downright ugly. This is where I found myself really getting angry for the first time. I don't understand this. I can't comprehend this kind of attitude towards one's neighbors. I wish I could understand it. Last day of the trip, we went back and we joined the Israeli Peace Movement, the Women in Black Vigil in West. We're in West Jerusalem, the Jewish part of Jerusalem, what the Israelis consider their capital, and the signs that we're holding say "End the occupation." We had a good time here. We also went to a demonstration near Sheikh Jarrah, where there are several hundred people talking about saying no to the takeover of homes in Sheikh Jarrah. I was telling you about the Hanun family earlier. This was fun. These people have been doing this peace vigil here since 1988. We've been doing our peace vigil here since 1999 during the bombing of Kosovo. These people have been doing it since the first Intifada. And it's exactly the same scenario. It was fun to be there. But also there's considerably more harassment by people driving by. As you can see, I'm back to the beginning now. This olive tree, as I said in the beginning, was in a Palestinian village that was taken over by Israelis during the Nakba, during the catastrophe. And after the people were killed or driven out and the town was razed, the olive tree, this 400, 500-year-old olive tree, was uprooted and transplanted to Ma'adumim, this Israeli settlement in the desert where all this water is being used to make a mall in the center of the street. All this water for all these flowers and grass and this olive tree, but the olive tree is just decoration. They're not being harvested. It's not being harvested. I find that this kind of use of water and land and resources, it's unsustainable, just like the occupation is unsustainable. There is this sense among Judaism that there is a need for land. Well, that struggle for land, that connection to the land, is just as strong and just as legitimate among Palestinian peoples in this area. I don't mean to compare, but it's a matter of there is a real feeling of connection to the land among peoples in this area of the world, much stronger than we're used to as Americans. It's a little bit hard to comprehend. My family was on a farm in northern Pennsylvania for generations, and then we just gave it up and never thought anything of it. But that doesn't happen in this area of the world. I just want to say a couple of words about the conflict itself. I think we need to understand that it is not as is commonly portrayed in the media of a fight between equals. Israel has the upper hand militarily. Israel has the upper hand militarily because the United States supports Israel with $3 billion of military aid every year. I've heard one person say it was estimated at $4 billion a year, but I'll stick with the $3 billion that the U.S. campaign to end the occupation says. $3 billion a year. The occupation is not a security thing. It's a proactive policy of settling people. In order for there to be peace here, there has to be a concept of win-win, where Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and Muslims and Christians and Druze and all the rest of the people that live in this very complicated area, there has to be a vision that we can all live in peace. I don't know whether or not that's possible under the two-state solution. That's the international consensus at this point. It probably would work. It might have worked. But at this point, with the West Bank being carved up by all of these settlements and roads and checkpoints, it's just impossible. So now there are people starting to talk about going back to the idea of a one-state solution, one non-sectarian democratic state. That's one possibility. Jeff Haper talks about other ways of how that might work. Various people of both peoples that we listen to, both Israelis and Palestinians, have talked about it. At this point, it is not politically viable, but it still has to be talked about. Most Israelis, as Jeff Haper says, most Israelis are willing to trade land for peace. Most people do not want to have peace at the expense of expansion and victory. Most Palestinians want peace. When Yasser Arafat ceded 78% of historic Palestine to Israel in I think in the Oslo Accords, somebody correct me on that?
Yeah, that's good enough, yeah.
When he ceded 78%, right after that there were elections for the Palestinian Authority, and he got 90% of the vote. This wasn't a rigged election. I mean, if it was a rigged election, it would be 99% or something. But most people on both sides of this conflict do want peace. But it will not be enough just for the Palestinians to have a Bandistan arrangement. I've tried to stay away from the term apartheid. I'm sorry I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it here. One last point. I don't have his name right at the moment, but I'm getting these emails almost every day from new profiles. And the woman who sends it talks about how the South African politician who designed the apartheid system in South Africa in the late 1940s was asked in 1963 whether Israel was an apartheid state. And this man who designed the apartheid system as an Afrikaner for South Africa said, yes, Israel is an apartheid state. Colonialism is where you do not allow a people to have self-determination. Apartheid is where you separate them and dominate them. Both are against international law. It's time we called Israel to obey international law. Thank you.